Eigel, Fitzwater, Huff, Roberts.
Here.
We have 4 present, 3 absent.
We do have 4 present, so we do have a quorum. We have 4 bills to hear today. We're going to kind of switch around order a little bit. First up, we'll do Representative McGirl with House Substitute for House Committee Substitute for House Bill 356. Proceed when ready, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. My name is Mike McGirl, and I'm the representative for District 118, Northern Washington County, Southern Franklin County. And what I have is House Bill 356, and what it does, it's got a few components in it. Number one, back in 2018 when they did the tax reform from the feds, the Schedule F was left off of the business income deduction for farmers. So they do not, at the present time, get to take advantage of that deduction on their personal returns, on their farm schedules. So this is just a thing to correct that inefficiency that happened at that time. And so that's one component of it. And then the second is I kind of look at this portion of it. This private pensions has a fairness issue. Right now, presently, if you have a public pension, which the legislator set up, and it began taking the deduction in 2012. And what it is, and I'm going to limit it to married filing joint. That way, and I'm not going to get into the head of household and the single filers, but on a married filing joint return, and 2 individuals that have public pensions, they can take a deduction if their income, the threshold is $100,000, and they can actually take a deduction up to $41,373 each. So, and basically I see this because I see this in my practice because outside of here I'm a CPA, I have my own practice, and so the examples that I brought are actually out of my own files, so that way it kind of gives you a good idea. But just an example, married filing joint individuals that have $145,000 of Missouri adjusted gross income, they will get each, after they make their subtractions, they will each get $41,373 in deductions, which makes a nice deduction for those individuals. And so consequently, now this is the individual married, this is a married couple. They made private pension, they made $41,900, and they wound up after, because there's a subtraction in there that you have to make for the Social Security, because it's limited to $32,000 is what the exemption amount. Instead of $100,000 on a public pension, it's $32,000. And and in this example, they wound up, because presently it's $6,000 per individual on a joint return if they both have a private pension. And so consequently, in this example, it's $8,678. That would be their deduction. So, what the bill does is it raises this exemption from 32 to 64. And it increases the deduction from $6,000 to $12,000 on an individual basis per individual. And so consequently, we give ourselves a pretty nice deduction on a public pension. I just kind of look at it as a fairness issue for individuals with private pensions. And so that's what that portion does. And then there's another portion. There was a sunset on the ESOP for companies that wanted to sell a portion up to 30% of their company to their employees. This allows a 50% tax deduction on capital gains over on the Missouri return. And so, kind of in a nutshell, that's pretty much what the bill covers. I'll take any questions.
Any questions for the bill sponsor? Seeing none. First up to testify in favor of House Bill 356. Proceed when ready.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Chuck Pierce, representing the Missouri Society of CPAs, and I want to speak to the amendment having to do with the farm incomes. When we established the business income deduction, that was included in Senate Bill 509 in 2014, and we did that by going through and listing, instead of trying to define what is business income, we tied it to federal returns, and those two schedules were just overlooked. They impact smaller farms, and if you have it in a partnership, it flows through in the partnership return. If you just own it as individuals, it flows through just on the Schedule F. We just overlooked that. You can tell by the fiscal note, it's not a large amount, but it does leave some returns out. And unfortunately, I usually hear about that about this time of the year, like at the end of the tax deadline is when CPAs call me and say, why aren't those two forms included? And we've just never gotten it in a standalone form. So we would support including that in. And the rest of that on the pension, as the sponsor said, is an equity issue just to equalize private pensions with the government ones. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Casey Wasser today representing the Missouri Soybean Association. We worked with Representative McGirl on the Schedule F piece in the House. Appreciate everybody's support. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, testify in favor.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Philip Arnzen with the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'd like to go on the record in support, specifically the ESOP provision that was added as an amendment reauthorizes the tax deduction for business owners that sell a stake in their company to an employee stock ownership plan. Our goal there is to hopefully incentivize ESOP ownership in Missouri.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Anyone else testify in favor of House Bill 356? Seeing none, anyone here to testify in opposition of House Bill 356? Seeing none, anyone here to testify for informational purposes only for House Bill 356? Seeing none. Representative, any final concluding remarks? Thank you. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 356. Representative Gregory, are you ready? We'll go a little out of order. Next up, House Committee Substitute for House Bill 675. Representative Gregory, proceed when ready.
I was born ready, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Curtis Gregory, State House District 51, representing Saline and Lafayette County. Before you today should be a virtually identical copy of Senate Bill 94, which is the SHOMO Act and the Recording Studio Tax Credit Act that many of you on this committee have filed. The only major difference specifies that the Department of Tourism, located within the Department of Economic Development, shall come up with the logo. That was something that we talked about, and as we threw on there. So that's the only major changes, and with that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Seeing none. First up, testify in favor of House Bill 675.
I appreciate the committee hearing my testimony. I think you've all heard me speak a few times. I'm Cole Payne, producer from Russellville, Missouri. I'd like to testify in favor because, first off, I personally don't mind traveling, so I can go to these other states and utilize their incentives that they're making a bunch of money on for their state, but I think our state needs it. And I think the average 4,000 kids that are graduating from our universities that are majoring in these programs every year need it so they can stay here and have a chance to have an opportunity to work at home here in Missouri. I think the millions of extra dollars that would be left in Missouri after this credit was given is definitely going to improve our economy, help public safety, help us build better communities all around. Some of the opposition I've heard, negative influence from Hollywood or, Hollywood not coming through and what they say. Well, we're the show me state, and that's how our bill works. The production has to come here, spend the money, they get audited, and then they get a tax credit for spending, millions and millions more than we gave them back in a credit in the state. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor of House Bill 675.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Nancy Giddens, representing Hallmark, the City of Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, and the Civic Council of Greater Kansas City. We supported the Senate version, we supported this version, and we've supported both for years. Would urge your support.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your
sir.
testimony. Next up, testify in favor of House Bill 675.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's a Monday for sure. Jackie Barget, registered lobbyist on behalf of Gateway Studios and Production Services, also here to testify in support, specifically on the music tax credit portion of the bill. I think both Senator Hoskins and Senator Beck carried that legislation, are very familiar with it. Just want to remind you that there's a cap on the program, there's a sunset on the program, and those wanting to qualify for the program have to expend over $1 million on Missouri vendors in order to even qualify and perform 2 concerts in the state.
Any questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor of House Bill 675.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Philip Arnzen with the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'd like to go on the record in support.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chuck Pierce, representing Associated Industries of Missouri, go on record in support of this, supported the both Senate bills and this in the House as well. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Thank you for your testimony. Next up to testify in favor.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Zach Pollack, registered lobbyist with the Britain Group on behalf of the Motion Picture Association. Just want to go on record in support of the bill.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Will Mars on behalf of the Branson Lakes Area Chamber of Commerce. Just want to go on record in support of the bill and thank the bill sponsor for bringing it forward.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Anyone else to testify in favor of House Bill 675? Seeing none, anyone here to testify in opposition of House Bill 675? Proceed when ready, Mr. Cady.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee. My name is Jeremy Cady, State Director for Americans for Prosperity. Just want to go on record in opposition to House Bill 675. We've covered this before. We think for furthering growth in the state of Missouri, we should be focusing on tax cuts, lowering either the income, corporate income, personal or corporate, or the personal property taxes would be better for us. So that's about it.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in opposition of House Bill 675. Seeing none, anyone here to testify for informational purposes only for House Bill 675? Seeing none, Representative, any final concluding remarks?
I just look forward to the day when we can say lights, camera, action on film production in the state of Missouri.
Great. Thank you, Representative. That concludes the hearing on House Bill 675. Next up, we have Senate Bill 721 by Senator Roberts. Proceed when ready, Senator.
All right, good afternoon. I'm Steve Roberts, State Senator from Missouri's 5th District, and I'd like to begin by thanking the Chair and members of this committee for affording me the opportunity to present Senate Bill 721. For a long time, Missouri's state historic tax credit program was considered to be a model for the rest of the nation. And at the heart of what Senate Bill 721 does is begin to address attempts to suffocate the program through unnecessary and intentionally overly burdensome regulations. Presently, reviews of applications for historical tax credits are delayed as long as a year, and developers have to navigate state standards which do not match their national standards. Now, Senate Bill 721 works to improve the system and increase transparency and reliability by implementing deadlines for responses from the State Historic Tax Preservation Office, requiring standards to match federal standards. Senate Bill 721 also works to make the state historic tax credit more accessible for small developers and rural developers by increasing historical tax credits in qualifying counties from 25% to 35% of total costs for the rehabilitation and adjusting the threshold to which tax credits do not count toward the aggregate limit authorized from $275,000 to $300,000. Similar legislation has passed the House overwhelmingly, and I plan to offer committee substitute which matches the language from the other chamber. I understand there's witnesses here to testify in favor, and they may be able to speak to some of the issues that they've experienced so far, but I'd gladly answer any questions from me if there are any. Thank you.
Any questions for the bill sponsor? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. First up to testify in favor of Senate Bill 721. Proceed when ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Jim Farrell, representing Historic Revitalization for Missouri. It is a trade association for the industry involved with the redevelopment of projects around the state. Our board is made up of members from different parts of the state: St. Joseph, St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, and other areas. I think one of the things that we wanted to point out is that this historic tax credit program has been one of the most effective economic development tools in the state of Missouri. It has developed and invested over $12 billion of private investment during since the start of this program, in probably over 3,000 projects. And it has been very effective in revitalizing areas that continue to develop around these historic projects that will not even use any tax credits. But in addition to that, it's been utilized in over 100 different communities, as well as developing 5,000 jobs annually. One of the big achievements is that every year it generates over $500 million in projects annually. That has been consistent since the start of the program in 1998. And one of the things that I think point out, $500 million every year. I just heard a recent information on TV about the St. Louis Cardinals, and just to give it perspective, they have 3 million fans a year. They indicated that their annual economic impact was $350 million. This program even exceeds that, and it is spread out throughout the state of Missouri. But it also increases the property values in and around those areas for the projects. So we want to emphasize the importance of the program, but most recently we've had tremendous difficulties in the bureaucratic red tape that has been created basically in 2018 when they tried to stifle the program administratively. And we have figures that back that up, where it was cut almost in half just by the administrative bureaucracy that was built in place. And then, importantly, we would like to see the increase in the rural areas outside of St. Louis and Kansas City in terms of the tax credit that will provide more incentives for the program. But that's just an overview of the program, and we've brought several people in from around the state. We had a number of people that came in for the House hearing, but from the people that have developed large projects down to the smallest projects, the economic impact of the overreaching regulatory morass has been substantial with all of these people. Thank you.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Senator Esslinger.
Just real quick, we have so many of our old courthouses all down the part of southern Missouri. Just kind of curious if this did apply to that.
This program does not, but there is a county courthouse program that is already existing in the Department of Natural Resources. They have a grant program that they award to applicants, but unfortunately DNR has not really implemented the program the last several years.
Okay.
For what reason, I don't know.
All right, well, I may get with you later to find more about that. Thank you.
Next up to testify in favor of Senate Bill 721. Proceed when ready.
Thank you. Thank you so much. The Missouri Tax Historic Program was one of the...
Can you tell us who you are and who you're with? First, sorry.
I'm McGirl with Restoration St. Louis.
Okay.
From St. Louis.
All right.
The Missouri program was the model for every other program that came after it, and that is no longer the case. It's a broken program. There are three major issues with the program: efficiency, redundancy, and transparency. In terms of efficiency, just currently we have projects that we placed in service in May of 2021. It took almost 2 years to get SHPO to approve those projects. In fact, it took about 10 months for them to even send it to the National Park Service for approval. The National Park Service approved it in 45 days, and then SHPO took another 8 months to approve something that the feds had already approved. It's now with DED, we still don't have the credits. The project has been carrying those bridge loans for almost 2 years, and it'll probably be several months before we receive those credits. Redundancy, the process has so many different redundancies, like the one I just cited as well, that create major inefficiencies. And then transparency, it's almost impossible to find out where the project is in the process from anybody at the state level, at SHPO or from DED. Thank you so much.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up to testify in favor of Senate Bill 721.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Jeff Neal. My wife, Caroline, and I own Neal Group Construction, which is Southwest Missouri's most experienced historic rehabilitation contractor. We're also winners of Missouri Preservation's McReynolds Award for contributions to the field of historic preservation in the state of Missouri. I'm here today asking you for your support of this important bill, and I'm here mainly because a year ago, Joplin nearly lost an $18 million out-of-state investor because of delays in this program. Since in the last 4 years, we have seen processing times for our applications more than double. In the case of that $18 million investor who was restoring three important buildings to the city of Joplin's identity and its structure, it finally took the involvement of legislators from this building to come in and push DNR to finally release the building, which was going through its second review after it had already been approved at the National Park Service. The State Historic Tax Credit Program was designed as an economic development tool. The reviewers in the State Historic Preservation Office have completely lost sight of this. It's designed to save town squares, small buildings on Main Street across the state, and the overreaching bureaucratic mess that has become the State Historic Preservation Office is causing this important tool to become ineffective. So we ask for your support in that. The other element to this is that it's an equal opportunity small development tool. A town of 1,300, Sarcoxy in Southwest Missouri, can use this tool to save their town squares, and there aren't a whole lot of tools that you provide these cities. and yet this is available to all. And this will the increase of the state historic tax credit, which, by the way, will not increase the amount budgeted for this program, will in fact encourage the out-of-state and local investor to come in and make the decisions to save those important buildings, which are important to our identities, sources of civic pride, which all of you probably have a small town in your district in which the people have given up hope. And yet by saving those important buildings in these small towns, we can bring that hope back. And that's certainly what we're here to encourage you to do. Over the last 3 years, we've seen interest rates go up. We've seen the cost of construction increase by 20% across the board. And yet this bill will help revitalize a program which was a national leader and has become a national trailer. And it will increase the opportunities for small investors to come into their small towns and make a difference. So please support this bill.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up to testify in favor of Senate Bill 721.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jim Erickson from the Economic Development Corporation. We want to support this bill. We in Kansas City have taken a good, strong look at this issue. I know it is a statewide issue, and this is a good bill statewide, but we in Kansas City specifically have had several headaches related to the program, which is why we have really rallied a lot of our development community and different stakeholders to take a strong look at it. This really fixes a lot of the procedural issues and timeline issues that have caused a lot of projects to maybe go overlooked because the tool doesn't feel like it is an option for development statewide or even in Kansas City. But just to give you another thing that we are facing that this bill really doesn't touch, but just kind of gives context for our frustration. The scoring system, which was revised a couple of years back, essentially has a 100-point scoring system. You need 70 to achieve Tier 1 to be really competitive. And because of the way that was rolled out, Kansas City's most prominent historic districts essentially don't need to score 70 out of 100. They need to score 70 out of a 78. And so, we look back at the last 122 projects that had utilized the tool, and 103 of them would no longer qualify. And for those of you familiar with Kansas City, the historic West Bottoms is essentially precluded from the tool. And so, again, this bill doesn't touch on that, but it's kind of a good example of why we in Kansas City have taken a good, strong look at the historic tax credit process and why we want to see several changes made so it can be more competitive moving forward. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am Nancy Giddens, here today representing the City of Kansas City, the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, and the Civic Council of Greater Kansas City. And I would just like to echo Mr. Erickson's comments.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none,
sir.
thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor of Senate Bill 721. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Proceed when ready.
Members of the committee, my name is Maureen McMillan. I'm a preservation consultant working primarily in St. Louis, pardon me, for the last 22 years. I'm also a board member of the Missouri Alliance for Historic Preservation. So I have been working, as I mentioned, I've been working with the tax credit program for 22 years. For most of those years, the tax credit program ran smoothly. Reviews were done in a very timely manner, typically less than 30 working days. Reviews moved through. Applications, the review staff typically would come out upon request to do a walkthrough of the property so you could kind of work out your issues ahead of time. In the last mainly 4 years, we've seen a dramatic shift in the way the program has been handled. This program is intended to be a rehabilitation program. The Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation intentionally built in a great amount of flexibility because this is not intended to be a restoration program. It's supposed to be an adaptive reuse program. We're taking old buildings and giving them a new use and giving them a new life and driving significant economic development at the same time. So in the last several years, we've seen, as others have mentioned, significant delays on projects. I've had applications submitted that were reviewed more than a year after they were submitted. Oftentimes, those projects have been completed if they are smaller projects, which many of mine are. We've had projects that were reviewed, demands were made after the project had been completed and sold. Projects have been denied at the end of that process when, after they were reviewed more than a year after submission. Projects have been denied, sometimes for reasons that were not brought up in the preliminary review. So, especially for small developers, that's untenable. Most people need to be able to begin their work on their projects as soon as the application is submitted. Construction costs are high, carrying costs are high. People can't afford to sit and wait. SHPO has been telling people they are supposed to wait until they get their approval to begin work. You cannot sit on a building for more than a year and wait to begin work at the end of a year, knowing that your rehabilitation may take another year. So we've seen burdensome delays. We've seen onerous review requirements. I had a large project in St. Louis 2 years ago that was very nearly denied because the reviewer at the time did not like the color of the terracotta panel that the architect had called out on the new entry vestibule, and she did not like the material that he was proposing to put in the ceiling of that same entry vestibule. This $14 million project almost got killed for 2 small issues. That was after it had been reviewed 3 times and not moved to the National Park Service. So again, many neighborhoods in towns, in cities across the state rely on this program to kickstart development in neighborhoods that are otherwise difficult or impossible to justify investment in.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next up to testify in favor of Senate Bill 721.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Michael Gibbons representing St. Charles County, and just go on record in support of the bill.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor of Senate Bill 721.
Chairman, thanks for having us here. Randall Brandt out of St. Louis, representing myself. The SHPO backlog and response time is detrimental to the program, specifically to small developers. Their unwillingness to compromise with even as small a thing as building codes or local ordinances that oversee like historical aspects of the neighborhood, they just won't compromise. They think their way is the right way, and that's the only way to have it. And the problem with that is that a lot of times we'll get these reviews back 7, 10, 11 months back. I've had 2 projects denied whenever reviews came back 8 to 11 months afterwards. They give us a review. They ask for additional pictures to the hundreds that we've sent in, and they ask for pictures that are like prior to work being done. And like, well, this project's already completed. It's done. It's on the road. Like, I'm a small developer. I can't hold $400,000 on my home equity and expect to not start any work. I need to turn these things around and get them sold. Their standards are always evolving. about in 2019, we had done a few projects, had preliminary approval, and then after those projects, we submitted a duplicate project, very similar scope of work. 11 months later, they send me a denial saying your work's not compatible with the standards. So they're just new personnel come in, they put their own twist on what they want to do, and they change the rules in the middle of a project. And for someone such as myself, that we might have 3 or 4 different projects going at a time, all like with the historic preservation niche, it can be extremely debilitating. It puts all kinds of pressure on you as a person, your family, and it's unneeded. There's just no reason for it. Whenever, prior to that, we started this program in 2017, approval on every single one of our projects, following the standards, following the guidelines from our historic consultants and other reviewers, and then all of a sudden things just change because different personnel come into the review position and it's their way or the highway, and they don't care how it affects you or your family or the program or the state of Missouri in general or the local municipalities. And that's pretty much the gist of it, but we've had 3 projects in general that have been denied out of the 20 plus projects that we have had approval on. One of them, they actually went behind our back and went to the National Park Service and had our project removed from historic designation without us being in the loop at all. They said they were continuing to look at the project to give us a reasoning or an opinion on it, and it took them 7 months to even give us a preliminary review. And in that 7 months, they said they came out and did a site visit. We showed them all the things that was like original to the building. And after they came out, they sent an email saying like, continue to find us evidence of like what you can find of what your building originally looked like. And we're going to keep it a topic of conversation. Between then and like 30 days later, they got some kind of documentation sent to the National Park Service, and the National Park Service reviewed it and made a decision that it was to be removed. So application went in, 7 months for the SHPO to review it. Within 30 days, they had a project removed from designation without me being able to submit any kind of documentation stating why the building is still creditable for the project. And this was in an area that we don't typically work in. It was still locally designated and federally designated for the entire neighborhood to qualify for the program, and they had it removed. We were just trying to supply any kind of evidence like, hey, this building hasn't been altered that much. They're saying the other stance is saying that, hey, it's been altered too much. They're asking us for evidence, and we supplied them everything, and they still just didn't give us any review, sent it to the National Park Service, and had it removed real quickly compared to the 7 months that it took to even get us any kind of response.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor of Senate Bill 721.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Fred Dreiling today representing the AGC Builders Association of Kansas City. And on behalf of our members from Kansas City, Joplin, Springfield, Columbia, we would like to go on record in support of Senate Bill 721, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor.
Hello, my name's Tim Green. I'm a registered lobbyist for the St. Louis Electrical Connection, which is an association of 150 electrical and communication contractors on the eastern side of the state, and we are in support of this piece of legislation.
Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next up, testify in favor of Senate Bill 721. Seeing none, anyone here to testify in opposition of Senate Bill 721? Seeing none, anyone here to testify for informational purposes only for Senate Bill 721? Seeing none, Senator, do you have any final concluding remarks?
No, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That concludes the hearing on Senate Bill 721. I think we're going to go ahead and go into executive session. I know couple senators have some other things to do, and then we'll conclude by hearing the hearing on Senate Bill 720. I move that we go into executive session. Do I have a second? I do have a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. As appear to have it, the ayes do have it. We are now in executive session. I now move that we bring up House Bill 133 before the committee. Do I have a second? I do have a second. This bill is before the committee. Senate Bill 513 creates the Entertainment Industries Job Act, which has been voted out of the Senate. And I do have a Senate committee substitute. I move that we adopt Senate committee substitute for House Bill 133. Do I have a second? I do have a second. The substitute adds the Show Mo Act language to this bill that we have also voted out of the Senate. Any discussion on the adoption of the Senate committee substitute? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting?
I just wanted to ask,
yes.
Is the logo
Senator
part
Beck.
going to be, is the logo part in the Senate substitute?
The local part.
The logo that the representative mentioned, or is that going to be a problem with something else?
This Senate Bill 133, I'd have to look and see if the logo was...
I didn't know if it presented problems with the bill that's over in the House.
Changed or... Yeah. I'd have to take a look as far as the logo goes, but that's something that we, if we do need to change it, I guess that's something we could do on the Senate floor as well. I don't know how important that logo is.
That makes sense. I just don't want to cause any
right
red line issues or some other issues.
Got you. No, I agree. All those in favor of adopting the Senate committee substitute say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. You have adopted the Senate committee substitute. I now move that we do pass Senate committee substitute for House Bill 133. Do I have a second? I do have a second. Any further discussion on the do pass motion? Senator Beck, and since this is Senate committee substitute, if we change it, obviously it would have to go back to the House anyway, so I see what you're saying. We'll check and make sure, and if it needs to be changed, we can change that in a Senate substitute. All right. Any further discussion on the do pass motion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Hoskins.
Aye.
Esslinger. Beck. Eigel. Fitzwater. Huff. Roberts. We have 4 ayes, 1 nay.
By your vote of 4 ayes and 1 no, you have voted do pass on Senate committee substitute for House Bill 133. I now move that we bring up House Bill 268 before the committee. Do I have a second? I do have a second. The bill is before the committee. House Bill 268 is Representative Riley's bill, which establishes the regulatory sandbox. This language has already been third read on the Senate floor and sent to the House in my Senate Bill 3. I now move that we do pass House Bill 268. Do I have a second? I do have a second. Any discussion? Senator Beck.
I'm going to go ahead and vote yes for it now, but there is some wording that I'm going to work with you on, hopefully, and maybe we can do something when it gets before it hits the floor. I don't want to take the committee's time.
All right. Sounds good. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Senators Hoskins.
Aye.
Esslinger. Beck. Eigel. Fitzwater. Huff. Roberts.
Aye.
We have 5 ayes.
By your vote of 5-0, voted do pass House Bill 268. I now make a motion to move out of executive session and resume our regular hearing. Do I have a second? I do have a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. As appear to have it, the ayes do have it. We are out of executive session. Next up, we have Senate Bill 720, the Work Opportunity Tax Credit.
I don't know. No, you won't. No. Okay, so now we're ready to hear Senate Bill 720. Senator Hoskins, you may begin when ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee. For the record, State Senator Denny Hoskins, representing the 21st Senatorial District, here today to present Senate Bill 720, which would establish a work opportunity tax credit. The work opportunity tax credit is the existing federal tax credit available to employers for hiring and employing individuals from certain targeted groups who have faced significant barriers to employment. My bill is a carbon copy of the federal tax credit and allows employers to claim 100% of their federal credit on their state return. This program incentivizes companies to hire individuals who are certified by the state as being a member of one of 10 targeted groups, which includes veterans, individuals on state assistance, individuals referred to an employer after completing a rehabilitation program, individuals experiencing long-term employment, individuals previously convicted of a felony, and a few other disadvantaged groups. Currently, our state agencies certify which individuals fit into these qualified groups on behalf of employers seeking the federal tax credit. Therefore, the mechanism is already in place to certify the qualification to claim this tax credit on an employer's state return. By mirroring the federal credit at the state level, we eliminate the need for additional red tape or regulations to allow all companies the opportunity to apply for the state tax credit. Finally, I believe this tax credit is another mechanism to help with the workforce shortages plaguing our state. The bill helps by providing an incentive for employers to draw from these targeted groups and get people back to work by providing gainful employment to individuals in these targeted groups and giving them an opportunity to come off social programs they are likely are reliant upon. I know I've got some expert witnesses that have experience with the federal work opportunity tax credit that are here to testify. With that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for the senator? Seeing none. First in favor of. Cut you off.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. David Jackson, registered lobbyist for Legis, Redwood, and Maxim Public Affairs. I want to go on record in support of Senate Bill 720 and appreciate the sponsor bringing this forward. Legis, Redwood, and Maxim is a diverse group of operating companies across many different sectors that employs about 10,000 people here in the state and has employees across the country specializing in a wide, diverse set of sectors. And as the sponsor indicated, this is a companion bill to the state or the federal legislation in tax credit that's been around since the 90s. And so it's currently jointly administered between the IRS and our Missouri Department of Labor, because while unemployment's low, they look at workforce participation among different categories, and the participation in the workforce is specifically low within the individuals that are on state programs. And so the intent behind this program in this federal credit is to incentivize employers to employ people who are in these targeted disadvantaged groups that face barriers. And because the state is already jointly administering this with the IRS, whenever an employer hires somebody in one of these targeted groups, the state has to certify that they are in fact, on unemployment benefits or on SNAP benefits, in a variety of categories. And so, by duplicating this, we're already doing the certification work, so it's a pretty seamless process in terms of implementation, and goes towards that goal of getting these workers off state programs and into the workforce. And so this is actually the most utilized workforce tax credit we currently have in the state, out of the federal program. And so we have over 43,000 employees that were hired through this in 2021. And we hope that this will drive it further. Happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions for this witness? Seeing none, just a comment. I appreciate you giving us the amount of usage and number of individuals impacted by this on the federal level. Next up, testimony in favor of. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Madam Chair, members of the committee, Nikki Strong with the Missouri Healthcare Association, here to go on record in support of this bill. Given the staffing crisis that we're all experiencing, we often hear this many times, there's people who are on social programs that won't come to work with us full time. We believe with this tax credit that this would give us the opportunity to provide additional education, recruitment opportunities for our employers, and could help us with our staffing crisis that we're facing today. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, Phil.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Philip Arnzen with the Missouri Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We'd like to go on the record in support. It's pretty clear we have a workforce problem in the state right now. It's difficult to find enough workers to fill all the vacancies. So anything we can do to help with that and get more folks back in the workforce.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Any questions for this witness? Seeing none, thank you. Next. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Jeff Smith, representing the Transformative Workforce Academy, which is a nonprofit that focuses solely on second chance employment for people who have justice involvement. We are in support of the legislation, appreciate the Senator's sponsorship thereof. Research suggests that the single biggest influence on whether or not someone who is justice involved and coming out of prison stays out of prison or returns is whether or not they achieve full-time employment in their first 6 months of coming home. This legislation, given that justice-involved people are one of the targeted groups, would help further that cause. Ultimately, we think it would help produce, it would be a small expenditure to help produce a significant cost savings down the line if it keeps people from going back to prison, which obviously is very expensive for taxpayers. The federal, I can tell you from having recruited over 100 employers into second chance employment in the St. Louis region, the federal work opportunity tax credit is certainly an inducement to them. Having a matching state credit, I think, would reinforce that.
Right. Thank you. Any questions for this witness? Seeing none. Thank you. Thanks. Are there any other who would like to testify in favor of? Seeing none, are there anybody here that would like to testify in opposition to? Seeing none, informational purposes only. Seeing none. Do you have any closing remarks, Senator Hoskins?
No, thank you.
No. I think that's the first I've ever heard of justice informed or whatever that was. But anyway, thank you. And I believe that is all that is coming for the committee. We now stand adjourned. Well, I guess I get a second. May I get a second? Second. We are now adjourned.